Hey, everybody, welcome back to Church History That Liberates. I am Megan Rohrer, and I have with me
Susan Strouse.
Welcome back. If you haven't heard us before, Church History That Liberates is meant to be a small nugget from history so that if you find yourself in a situation where someone says, you can't do that, it's never been done that way before, that you might know a
Might
tidbit
have
from
been
history.
done.
It might have been, it probably has been done before. Not that the person's going to believe you or suddenly change their mind about everything they have thought out, but because it might just make conversation more interesting to say, hey, but what about? And today's episode might be a little spicier than your grandma's ready for, but here we go.
Your grandma might be pretty cool, though.
Yeah, I know. If your grandma lived through the 60s and 70s, your grandma might be fine with it. But it's not something you talk about every day in church, nor would I recommend you talk about it every day in church. This is a subject to talk about because there ain't no kids around. You're just listening to a podcast. And some of what we're talking about, you might think, hey, I want to see that picture. If you look at the link below in the podcast, you'll be able to find a PDF of the slideshows that I am going to show Susan. Now, Susan has not seen these images before, nor does Susan have context for them, so it could be quite interesting. What I'm going to show you, Susan, is some ancient Bible illustrations. Remember back in the oldie times, they didn't have a printing press, so all of the Bibles had to be written by hand, and they often had really beautiful paintings in the margins for people to think about them. And so here is our first slide of one of the paintings in the Bible. And Susan, would you please describe to those who are just listening what you see?
Whoa. Holy cow.
You want me to say what it is, or you got this?
Well, it's sort of like looking your first time at a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. It's like, wait a minute. Is that what I think it is? No, it can't be. But yep, it is. Vaginas. There I
Yes.
said.
Well, more specifically, the side wound of Christ.
Oh, is that what that is?
So these are paintings of the side wounds of Christ, but they were intentionally painted to look like vaginas and wombs. Now, look at them yourselves. You can decide. For those of you who like art history, like me, many of them will be the mandorla shape, or what men called the almond seed shape. And what women looked at these pictures and went, you guys, come on.
Yeah, come on.
Some of the two pictures that are in front of Susan right now actually even have smaller circles inside of them, reminiscent of lady parts, not necessarily in the right spot, but maybe it was painted by men. The one on the right has 5 gouges in it that are bleeding, representing the five different places they believe that Christ had holes or scars during the crucifixion. So the hands and the feet and the side wound stab. One thing that is helpful to remember, like, why would they just make it look like female genitalia in these sacred Bibles? There's a couple reasons. One, in the gospel, I believe Matthew, it says that when Jesus was stabbed with a spear, out came water and blood. Yeah. Water and blood being the same liquids that come out when there is childbirth.
Yeah.
And so that was thought to be sort of intentional. I'm going to scroll through some of these. So the one on the left is from 1369. The one on the right is from 1413. Most of these come from books of hours. Oh, one thing before I show you some more, Susan, some of them are kind of smeared because you remember how in some traditions they kiss the book?
Yeah. Okay.
They believe in these pictures, people also would like touch it. Have you ever seen that in a very special church where they parade the gospel book and everyone touches it?
Sure, yeah.
Read between the lines because I'm not going to say this directly.
Okay.
These books were made of animal skin.
Okay.
So they felt like skin.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
There you go. There you have it.
All right. So
okay.
Here are a few more. Also about Jesus's resurrection, the one on the crucifixion, the one on the right, a little smeared.
Yeah, definitely smeared.
Definitely smeared.
Uh-huh.
Um, and all of them a red orange flesh color for those that
Mhm.
can't see it. Here's a
Wow.
few more.
Wow, y'all, you need to see all these.
Many of
Okay.
them from the 1300s, right? Medieval period, remember, is one of the times we find a lot of gender nonconformity in the ways that people are thinking about God and the sacred, a lot of embracing of the female.
Uh-huh.
Now, lest you think it was a thing they only did in the oldie times, I'm going to show you that it continued this belief that the side wound of
Yeah.
Christ, or that there was a sacred vagina connected to one part of the Trinity, is a belief people carried with them. So this is a painting by Hildegard of Bingen,
Uh-huh.
and it is called The Egg of the Universe, and it also has some anatomical smaller circles up
Yeah.
in the almond mandorla shape.
Yeah.
That is very vaginal.
Those mystics really definitely had some ideas about the femininity of Jesus, right? Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And these here are Moravian, and
Uh-huh.
they're from early America. The
Oh.
Moravians, for those of you who don't know who the Moravians are, you should learn about them because the Lutheran Church is a full partner with the Moravian Church, though we
Yeah.
don't talk about it a lot. Most people don't know that. These are Moravian cards uh, that were preached about, and a process used by Moravians who served in Lutheran churches in early America. And these cards are examples of what people had. Have you ever been to a store where they have like generosity cards, and each
Uh-huh.
day you pull out a card and it has a quote on it and it tells you something generous, or you could pull out a Bible quote and it's like a deck of cards and each day you
Uh-huh.
get a random one. In the early Americas, they made cards like this to
Uh-huh.
give them a thing to pray for the entire day.
Oh, okay.
And these are pictures of the Jesus's side wound cards. And they reminded, we believe, women that sensuality was great and their husbands were great
Yeah.
and joy was great. One of them talks about the quivering of Christ. Do you want to describe their shapes, Susan?
Well, it's very interesting to look at the different ones. Certainly, it wouldn't be very difficult to see them as vagina shaped, but oops, that changed something. Oh,
Yep,
there's more.
because there's
Oh,
a
wait,
lot of them.
oh,
There's
there's a
over
lot of them,
200
right?
of them.
But
Yeah.
they're very creative. I mean, they've got all kinds of interesting illustrations and writings and things within
Mhm.
them, but they're definitely that kind of that shape of openness and um sort of a, I don't know how to say this, but sort of a welcoming and entry into this message or this
Some
paint.
with hair.
Some with hair, yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, so
Interesting.
here's a fun fact about why this kind of appreciation of sexuality and sensuality
Mhm.
uh, isn't what we believe today as Lutherans. It was being preached to the earliest Lutherans in the United States. Why
Mhm.
isn't it what we believe today? So there's a book um, by, let me show you the book for those who are watching on the video. There's a book called Jesus's Female Moravians and Radical Religion in Early America by Aaron Spencer Fogelman. And he talks about how the Moravians were preaching with the Lutherans. What ends up happening is these cards uh, inspired women, and a Lutheran pastor got real angry about these particular cards and the imagery on the cards
Oh.
and started creating the division between the Moravians and the Lutherans that then had to be resolved later in our church history, arguing men should have their place, gender should be fixed, sexuality should be firm, and that the Trinity wasn't female in part. But I
Mhm.
kind of like imagining the pioneer Lutherans hearing some stuff that would feel scandalous today in their regular preaching. And what would have happened if the Lutherans didn't talk him out of it? Right? Okay. So that happens. Now, what about the people who say, that's not really a vagina? You're just seeing that in there. It's painted red because it's bloody. How else would you paint a wound? You're just seeing what you want to see in that. Stop being so scandalous, right? So for people who want to say, no, it wasn't ever a womb, we also have these biblical paintings of children being born out of Jesus's side.
Holy cow, look at that.
And do you know who that child is that's being born?
Looks like an emperor or king or something.
It's the Christian church.
The Christian church. Oh my
The
goodness.
Christian church is born out of the side wound of Jesus. And the picture that we have is like painted on inside Bibles, one from Austria and one in the French collection of babies, and it's Jesus delivering a baby coming out of Jesus on the cross, which is trippy.
Yeah.
And the baby comes out with the blood and with the water. And we know that this was a way that people believed that like sacredness happened because they painted Adam and Eve the same way. They painted Eve being birthed out that same kind of location of the side hole, kind of birthed a full-grown woman out of Adam.
They're not equating this with the rib. No, that definitely was a wound in the side, right?
The word rib means something like cartilage tissue. I'm not saying it's rational nor
right,
biblical.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you there are people who believed this enough that in the most expensive books, like very few people were able to own these. You would have like one copy for the whole church community in your town. But in at least 4, we have pictures of a baby being born out of the side of Jesus.
Yeah.
And often next to a painting of Jesus. Look, in this painting, Jesus is the one who delivers Eve out of Adam's side wound, which also not very technically accurate. One and the one on the left is a mosaic from 1140, and the one on the right is a painting in a biblical manuscript.
How fascinating, right? That these things are even that people would look at these and think about them and talk about them, and I guess not be scandalized by them. This was just something. This is the way people might think about it these days. And so, was it maybe during the Enlightenment that everything sort of got into this rational? We have to. I don't know. That can't have happened. Jesus couldn't have birthed Jesus out of his own side. We got to do away with that, right?
All of these were painted before the Reformation.
Before the Reformation.
They were all painted before the Reformation. Remember, the plague happens. Everyone gets scared. They don't like bodies. And then the printing press happens. And in the printing press, that fear of the body from the plague becomes known as the oldest story that happened.
Yeah. That's, it's such an important thing to realize, and we don't. We just, I haven't thought about, I always thought, the printing press, that's, it's the reason the Reformation happened, and yay, but never thinking about what was going on at the time.
Well, just that there was diversity of thought, and the same kind of diversity of thought that there is now was happening in those years. Right. Yes, the church was doing some shenanigan-y stuff and trying to sell worship services and shouldn't have done those things. Yes, there was a lot of strange things happening in the world, and people needed the liberational idea that Luther had that helps people know that God adores them, right? But there's also some kind of cool stuff that maybe wasn't Luther's favorite because he was a celibate monastic until he was forced to be married by someone he didn't really want to marry. And good for him. He became a good family man later, but kind of, it's like Paul writing how marriage should be.
Right.
How do you know, Paul? Right? Like, and so if you have someone for whom Luther said celibacy was his call, maybe they're not the ones who should do the writing on sexuality or on
Yeah,
bodily
you
love and
think.
joy. I don't know. I just know that it's interesting to think about. And when I travel and speak to college kids, it's something that provokes them into looking things up and learning about the church.
Yeah.
Not because I have inspired them to like become pastors, but because if I say, well, in old Bibles, they used to paint vaginas or things that look like vaginas,
No.
it's interesting enough that people want to go and look it up. And so
Right.
I'm not saying that this is what we teach every day in Sunday school or that this should be what our theology is centered around, but maybe there could be a few counter narratives to the women are
Well,
bad,
it's
your
such an
bodies are
important
bad.
thing, though, because I mean, church religion, at least Christian religion, has so been equated with anti-sexuality,
Yeah. Yeah.
anti-female, femininity, all those kinds of things. So to be able to do anything that we can to mitigate against that is important, you know. And to be able to go back to the Bible and to the early days of Christianity and say, look, it's here.
Yeah.
So we're not making this stuff up.
Well,
Right here.
how would your life have been different if the church had continued to have images like this? And then they wouldn't have had the excuse women can't be pastors because of
Right.
these parts of their bodies. Because
Right.
if those sacred parts of the body are beautiful enough to be painted into a Bible, they're not so scandalous that they can't be a
Well,
part of all of the leadership of
and
church.
women being sold this message that somehow women lady parts are inferior or dirty or not to be looked at, right? We were joking earlier about the 70s, you know, and I was saying, yeah, get out our little pocket mirrors because that was the big thing for women to actually
Yeah.
look
Yeah.
and see what your own parts look like. And it was such a, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because we've been taught, oh, stay away from there. Don't go there. Don't go there.
Do you think these kinds of images are things that like an average congregation can handle talking about? Or do you think it's the kind of thing that always has to stay the like quirky fact that we know and don't talk to others about?
I was just thinking about, wow, how cool would it have been to have some of this included in the ELCA's social statement on women and justice and whatever it was called, anti-sexism kind of thing, instead of just having, you know, because we are neighbors to one another and we're going to be blah, 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 to actually say, hey, you know, let's build our foundation on what really was there all along, you know.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
who knows what Jesus's body was like? We don't there's not much in scripture that describes it other than the people who made fun of him for being too fat. And saying that when he goes up the mountain, he gets whiter, right? Like we don't have a lot of descriptions. And yet so many of us think about like hunky six-pack Jesus with
Right,
Fabio hair
right,
and Roman robes as the
right.
guy that we imagine when we think about it. And there is thankfully private parts are private in scripture. And so we're not
Mhm.
thinking about what's going on for everybody. But sometimes I think it would be nice if we could find ways to love each other by imagining that there is no part of them that is separated from God and then really actually meaning it.
Right, right. Yeah. Wow, wouldn't that be something, huh? What a great idea. We should try that.
Hmm. I
Just
don't know.
say.
I call me a kid who grew up with those green hymnals and believed it when they talked about it. But
Yeah.
well, whatever brought you to kind of this conversation, hopefully we didn't scare you away. And I kind of hope you do go talk to your grandma about it now.
Yeah. Your grandma can probably tell you a thing or two. Those little mirrors.
Probably.
Yep.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.